It has been brought to my attention that I kind of left y'all hanging with regard to this balloon saga that's happened over the last couple of weeks. And frankly, it fell off my radar because while I feel the first balloon was legitimate Chinese spying, the rest of the balloons were probably just commercial weather balloons or hobbyist balloons. But a lot of the young people that follow me have concerns where they have heard that it could potentially be extraterrestrial activity with aliens or potentially China's enhancing its capability to weaponize these balloons and attack the US. Well, before I get to all the balloon saga, I want to talk about the term UFO. Now, UFO stands for unidentified flying object, but it doesn't necessarily mean alien or extraterrestrial. It just means that it's an unidentified flying object. These could be anything, up to and including a balloon that hasn't been able to be identified. The U.S. government has used this term for decades. So when you hear in the media unidentified flying object, it doesn't mean it's alien or extraterrestrial. I know Hollywood has liked to make those two synonymous, but it's really not when it comes to the official definition of an unidentified flying object. And talking more about the alien situation, I will say that it's likely that if there are extraterrestrials out there with the capability for interstellar travel, they would be able to avoid being shot down by an AIM-9 Sidewinder missile. Not only that, they'd probably be so advanced that we wouldn't even be able to detect them. Think of us as humans just 100 years ago, in the 1920s, with our Model T cars, just going about in the roaring 20s. Now, think of us as a human race 10,000 to 1 billion years in the future. That was what would be necessary for an alien race to reach interstellar travel. We would also have weapons and detection systems that would far outpace where we are right now. In the year 12,000, we would be so advanced that probably the people in the year 2000 wouldn't even recognize them, let alone detect them or be subject to their weaponry. So it would be like us right now, going back fighting cavemen, because the oldest civilization is only 6,000 years old. So I just don't think this is an extraterrestrial situation. And finally, the U.S. and Canada have come forward and said the balloons were not of extraterrestrial origin. So now that we've discussed what the balloons aren't, let's talk about what the balloons probably were. Well, the first one started the controversy was obviously a Chinese spy balloon. And the Chinese swear it was a civilian weather balloon for meteorological research, but it wasn't. The payload was way bigger than an actual Chinese weather balloon, and the U.S. officials say the spy balloon went off course when its propulsion system stopped working and it was caught in the prevailing winds. Now, the Chinese then hoped the U.S. wouldn't notice it because we really haven't noticed these before, and took the opportunity to spy where they could. Well, the original targets of this balloon were Guam and Hawaii, not the mainland U.S., and according to intel found on the balloon, the reason for spying on the balloon was likely in Guam was because the U.S. Marine Corps has just reopened a base about a week before the balloon was launched in Guam, or launched in China, to focus on Guam as a potential launching point for the U.S. military in the event Chinese become aggressive towards Taiwan. So we shot that balloon down and are now analyzing and sharing the intel with our allies, despite the anger from China, frankly. Now this brings me to the other three balloons that NORAD shot down, which NORAD stands for the North American Aerospace Defense Agency or something like that. But basically it's a joint venture between the United States and Canada to protect the airspace over North America. Now, these ones that were shot down, the Biden administration said that U.S. and Canadian intelligence communities believe these three, separate from the one big Chinese balloon, were most likely tied to private companies or recreation or research institutes and not a part of the Chinese spy program, nor do they believe they're extraterrestrial at all. So one of the balloons shot down over Canada may have been a hobbyist balloon, and the FBI is currently speaking with that hobbyist group, which is the Northern Illinois Bottle Cap Balloon Brigade, based outside of just north of Chicago. And they're trying to figure out whether this balloon may have been the reason for all of this ruckus with the balloons. The hobbyist club said that while their balloon went missing the exact same day the other balloon shot down. It's too soon to say whether it was shot down by a warplane. They also said that their balloon was launched following all federal regulations. Now, Dan Bowen, who's an expert on the design of these hobbyist balloons, which are called Pico balloons, say that he's 98% sure the Air Force did shoot down a hobbyist balloon. And what's interesting is this balloon was launched back in last fall and has circled the globe 6 times, being tracked by the Hobbyist Club. Now, the Hobbyist Club says they've lost contact with the balloon previously, but it's pretty big coincidence that the very same day they lost the contact with their balloon as when the U.S. Air Force shot down a balloon that was supposed to be in the same vicinity. Now, interestingly, once the realization came to the U.S. and Canadian governments that it might have been a Pico balloon, the U.S. and Canada called off the searches because they're expensive to search for things like this. And the reason it's expensive is because a Pico balloon ranges between $12 and $150, and the U.S. decided to use a $400,000 missile to destroy it. These balloons are launched by amateurs and can measure meteorological variables such as temperature, humidity, pressure, wind currents, and then they transmit it through the global radio network. Hundreds of these balloons are launched weekly, and they're everywhere around the globe, providing us with data on the status of the climate on Earth. Now, it's not certain what the purpose of the other balloons they shot down were for, since the recoveries were called off. But the Biden administration again said it's probably not Chinese spying, nor is it extraterrestrial. So why the sudden coincidence that 4 balloons were spotted over the space of a week? Well, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Hemispheric Affairs, Melissa Dalton, told reporters that we have been more closely scrutinizing our airspace at these higher altitudes, including upgrading and enhancing our radar, which may explain the increase in the objects we've detected over the past week. Now, side note, it also explains why we didn't detect them before, because I remember people talking about how during the Trump administration's 3 balloons flew over the U.S. and they were detected way out later than and after anything could have been done about them. So the reality is the upgraded radars probably explain this. Now, despite the balloons being these Pico balloons being small size, are about 9 feet across, the U.S. radar systems can detect objects around 6 feet across. So they absolutely will be able to see these balloons. Even the most advanced radars in the U.S. can detect small birds, but the software is tweaked to ignore things like birds and balloons. The update that took place to enhance the radar likely changed those parameters and it started picking up balloons as unidentified. And given the recent very real Chinese spy balloon situation, it put NORAD on edge. Now, normally the radar is tuned not to pick up balloons, but like I said, the enhancements likely changed that. On top of that, Russia seems to be using balloons for counter battery situations in Ukraine. So what they're doing is they're attaching reflectors to the bottoms of balloons. When the balloons are detected by the anti-aircraft missile systems and launched at the balloons, the Russians then fire back at the Ukrainians. That's a separate issue altogether. That's absolutely something Russia's doing, putting reflectors on balloons and floating them over to detect where Ukraine is firing their missile defense systems from. So that's it. That's the whole balloon saga wrapped up in a package. It's not aliens, other than the one big, huge balloon that was like 300 feet across and carrying a couple bus-sized payload. The other ones were likely just normal weather balloons. And it begs the question, will this poor balloon organization get their $12 back from the U.S. government for shooting down their balloon because they followed all regulations? Who knows? But I hope that clears things up. I hope it puts people at ease who are concerned that we are being invaded by aliens or being watched by aliens or being attacked by the Chinese. The reality is the Chinese aren't attacking us. That would be dumb of them. And if aliens are watching us, we would never know it. Have a good day, everyone.